Hello, and welcome to an episode of a Wicked Parley. I'm your host, Justin, and this is my fellow co-host, Rose. So, today we're going to be talking about a few different fun things, but primarily discussing the concepts surrounding extraterrestrial life, otherwise known as aliens. Ooh.
Oh, mystery. I think I accidentally muted myself when I said hello.
Oh no.
My bad.
That's okay. So, when it comes to the particular discussion around extraterrestrial life, do you have any thoughts and opinions about that, Rose?
Just excited to see what we're going to cover today. Hi, host 2022. Oh my god.
And hello. You're excited to see what we're going to talk about?
Yeah, I'm excited to see some of the stuff we're going to talk about. I'm excited to see who else knows about what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. Let's just jump right into it. I think that we can first by defining this particular discussion by framing just how big the universe really is. To think about it in a way that's easy to frame, would you throw up a picture of the local group, which is the nearest grouping of galaxies to the Milky Way galaxy?
This thing, right?
Yes, that is the image. So in this particular image, there's a series of small galaxies and a couple decent-sized ones like Triangulum and Andromeda, and then the satellite galaxies that orbit them. This just is an enormous, large amount of distance. I mean, if you look at the top portion, it actually talks about it in 1,000,000 light years. Is that little etching distance? So that gives you kind of the idea, at least, of just how far away, say, the Milky Way is from Sextillion B. So the universe is freaking huge. So let's go ahead and click out of this particular picture for a second, and let's talk about the ultra deep field pic from the Hubble Space Telescope, which is another great one. The background behind this next image is that it was a blank picture of the nighttime sky that the Hubble Space Telescope kind of randomly took a deep, long look at, and that's why it's called the deep space image. And in fact, every single point of light that you see in this particular image is actually a full-fledged galaxy. It's crazy far away. So,
Some of them are absolutely tiny.
yeah, I know, right? Isn't it incredible to see how many different spots of light there are? And so, when a lot of people see images like this, they can jump to the conclusion that alien life, because of the simple numbers, must exist somewhere in the universe. And to be fair, I kind of have to agree with them to some extent. I think that the things that I disagree with the most, and I think it's important that I state my side of this first, is that I think because of the amount of time that information takes to travel from one place to another, I suspect that communication with intelligent life forms is going to be very difficult. And currently, with the amount of physics that we understand, I think it's probably more like impossible if they're outside the Milky Way galaxy. And so that kind of narrows down the focus a little bit, down to our neck of the woods. If you want to throw up the next image.
Yeah, sure. Also, you're going to cover that more in depth later when we're talking about one of the topics later.
Oh,
right?
absolutely. I'll be talking about this in greater depth, yeah.
Oh, come on. There you go.
Oh, okay. So this isn't quite the normal nighttime sky that you might be traditionally used to looking at. That's because this has been artificially enhanced by an artist. But most people don't know this, but most images, if in fact all images, in one way or another, are manipulated when they're brought back, or if they're, however they're gathered. And so, what the point behind this particular picture is this. The nighttime sky that you can see, assuming you're in an area where there's low light pollution, and you look out and you see tons of points of dots, is only about 25 to 30,000 possible stars. That's what you can see with the naked eye. A telescope, depending on how powerful it is, can see many times greater than that. But here's the thing. When it comes to our ability to broadcast strong signals into space where something could potentially detect us, we've only been doing that for a little over 100 years, give or take. And you could argue that actually it's less than that. Because the strongest signal, to my knowledge, that would be strong enough to really have any staying power was actually, I believe, the Olympic opening ceremony where Hitler began the Olympic Games. So that's what a great image to start with. Start the, this is us, guys. Horrible person, right? So anyways, what are your thoughts about that, Rose?
About the whole
Scale.
About the scale?
Yeah.
It makes me feel smaller than I already am. Like I'm a tiny gal, so.
Yeah. Honestly, the thing that makes me feel small is the pale blue dot. That's the one, like the Carl Sagan.
I should have grabbed that picture.
Yeah, that's a great one. It's like all the wars and all the things that have ever been fought have been fought on this one tiny, insignificant dot that's been cast in a light beam. And it's like that particular thing is just it's poetic, but yet it just shows just how insignificant we all are when it comes to things on the greater, the grand scheme, So yeah, as I was continuing, I believe, do we have any questions or anything?
Let's see. Okay, let me pull this up. We've got one. Do you want to take a preview at it?
Sure, let's take a look at it.
Okay. I am currently in the middle of formatting it, so I can, pop it.
I just read it. Sam Fisher 045. Okay, so it reads, how was his actual speech? Did it show off how horrible he was during it? I've never seen it. To be fair, I've only seen a clip of it. It was a long time ago, ironically on the History Channel. And the way I remember it actually is just kind of like he was speaking obviously in German, and he had kind of like that authoritative kind of voice, but it kind of had like this like weird look about him, like kind of like a deranged look. So definitely not a strong start to Introduction to Humanity, at least as far as I could tell. Was there any more, or you want me to continue?
This one's more of a comment, which I said would not be put up, only questions would be put up. But we've got a comment about the whole we're so insignificant in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
Also from Sam Fisher 045. And yet some people think they're the center of the world or even the universe. I'm paraphrasing that.
Yeah. Isn't ego just a wonderful thing?
Get me started on some people.
All right. So there's another couple of notions that are kind of important. Do you want to go ahead and throw up the next image?
Sure. Let me go ahead and get to that one. Okay. Also, all images will have their URL links in the description once the episode is over. So
if you find one you like, who knows, maybe make a good background or something. Could be cool.
Alright, this one, right?
Yes, yeah. So this is kind of like an image that you could kind of imagine as the tail end of the Milky Way galaxy. For all of those who haven't seen the Milky Way galaxy, I encourage you, go outside, go to an area where there's, decently far away from any major light source, and, on a clear night, stargaze. It's a wonderful thing. But the thing that is most interesting about this particular picture, and why we're talking about it, has to do with the fact that it has a lot of gas particularly captured in the upper portion of the screen. Why is that important? Well, gas is one of the main ingredients for stars, which is like, oh my god, hey, look at that. And more particularly, these kind of areas form stellar nurseries. And the idea behind a stellar nursery is, of course, the creation of multiple star systems. But more importantly than that, it's also believed to be where a lot of the heavier elements actually are condensed after a supernova explosion, which is important for the creation of heavy metals, which are necessary for, if you were to have an advanced civilization, have access to essentially build and create the equipment necessary to communicate. So there's a big question out there is just, how often are metals present on the surface of worlds? And so far, at least in our system, Sol, it seems like it's fairly common on the inner system, but most of the moons are, they're made of ice and gases and carbons, and very few metals are actually there. So it begs the question, when it comes to the habitable range of worlds, how common metals might actually be. The next thing, actually, if I remember correctly, has to do with it's images of the multiverse, where it's an idea. It's like an artistic idea.
Oh yeah,
Mm.
yeah. I chose this one purely because I'm biased toward the aesthetics, but it's a really pretty picture, to be honest.
Well, I okayed it because it actually demonstrates a really interesting idea. You see, obviously, as a planet goes around a star, it creates a revolving thing. Technically speaking, no planet occupies the same space, technically speaking, in a system as long as it's orbiting around the star. It's entirely possible that parallel worlds you might exist exactly alongside ours, just slightly delayed in some way or another. And parallel worlds is one of the most common explanations for the reasons why UFOs exist in like, I guess, to the point where you can be seen. And so perhaps, it's speculated that aliens and UFOs are just, I guess, dimensional next door neighbors. And so it's something to, potentially, huh?
Our next door neighbors with a potential terrible first impression.
Well, I mean, have you met anybody yet? I mean, I haven't, so I can't exactly say anything bad about them.
I mean, we're probably gonna make a terrible impression with the whole Hitler thing. Oh, that reminds me. One comment from Sam Fisher.
Mm-hmm.
He made a comment about how, that feels like the best way to describe humanity given our track record. What's wrong with me?
Okay. I don't know what to say to that, but okay, sure.
I don't know what to say to that either. I don't know if I want to disagree or agree because we've done some stuff.
Aliens are in the White House, Matt. I'm not so sure about that. I'm gonna go with no. And then how are them old dudes living so long? Alien. Okay, I think you're confusing medical advancements with aliens. An understandable like confusion, but I swear to you, that's not the case. So on to the next particular subject. Well, not subject, but part. It has to do with a metric by which we can kind of, discuss the potential existence of alien life. There was a famous, I believe he was a professor at first, and then now he's just considered a scientist, Frank Drake. And he created this equation that explained the potential for how many possible intelligent civilizations might exist in the Milky Way galaxy. Rose, would you be willing to kind of pop it up on here and kind of walk us through each of the equation?
Yeah. Alright, so let me go ahead and adjust this so we can see the thing. No. There we go. Alright, first is what everything equals to n, the number of technologically advanced civilizations in the Milky Way galaxy. And then it's equal to r asterisk. Too many symbols sometimes. The rate of formation of stars in the galaxy.
That particular part is incredibly important due to the findings that were found out by some scientists in the early 2000s studying the Eagle Nebula. That particular value has been kind of discovered. And if anyone cares to look it up, they can, or they can ask me about it. And if they don't care, then we'll continue on.
Also, when you were talking about Frank Drake, he is, I believe, both a scientist and a professor.
Yeah, it depends on which particular time period. I mean, if someone watches this video later on, he's not going to be a professor at some point.
Alright. Next, F subscript P, the fraction of those stars with planetary systems.
Okay.
And subscript E, the number of planets per solar system with an environment suitable for life. Some of these pictures.
I know, right?
F subscript L, the fraction of suitable planets on which life actually appears. F subscript I, the fraction of life-bearing planets on which intelligent life emerges. Why is that a picture of Stonehenge?
Because apparently the chief achievement of all of us is Stonehenge. I mean, forget
Like,
the pyramids, forget forget any of the other monuments that exist. Stonehenge is our biggest achievement, clearly.
F subscript C. Fraction of civilizations that develop a technology that releases detectable signs of their existence into space. That's a small paragraph. And then the last one, L. The length of time such civilizations release detectable signals into space. I like the hourglass picture.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to try and walk through this particular equation now that we've kind of had a chance to hear a little bit about it. Okay, so the first thing is that N has to do with the number of technologically advanced civilizations. However, the metric by which we describe a technologically advanced civilization is contingent upon what we perceive to be intelligence. And I think that when this equation was first thought about, I think it was framed with the idea that you had a civilization that had the ability to both receive and send a powerful enough radio signal that it could communicate to another civilization across the Milky Way galaxy, which would require a significantly powerful system, which we only became sort of available to us, or became available to us sort of around the 50s, the 60s. So to get an idea of about how minimal technology would require, and of course then there's the advanced levels of technology that would be required to transmit a signal. So that part is kind of where that comes from. Now, the rate of star formation in the galaxy is contingent upon the amount of materials that exist in the system. And so that is a constantly evolving equation, which is the reason why it's kind of interesting, because it means that like older galaxies that have been around for a long time, like the Sombrero galaxy as an example. I mean, if people are familiar with some of the Messier galaxies because they're, stock images and whatnot. But those particular galaxies are extremely low in the building blocks. And so after a couple million years, they're actually going to fade from existence. You're not going to be able to see them because the light will become too dim, because they'll be predominantly made up of brown dwarfs and things like that. And so that particular rate is really crucial because it's going to allow for the transmission of raw materials that are necessary to communicate. The fraction of planets in the system, the thing has been recently amended. This is the older version of the equation. The amending part is no longer planets, but planetary bodies, meaning that could be moons, could be, planets, could be odd conditions that we can't even begin to think about. Like that's just, it doesn't really matter as long as it lives in a zone where liquid water can exist. And to some people, including myself, I even question whether or not liquid water is necessary for intelligent life, because we are sort of assuming that life is going to follow the same blueprint that it has on Earth. And I'm not sold on that as a concept, but that's for another day. And then when it comes to the number of opportunities which life can develop on a world is another equation. And the thing that you might start to get as a running theme of this is that most of the stuff that's available to us when it comes to knowledge is we're taking a best guess, because obviously, I mean, we have just recently been able to start to detect planets around stars. It's only been about the last 20 years or so that we can really detect planets, and it's only been really in the last 5 that we've been able to make any sort of real claims at seeing worlds that are small enough to have liquid water and some of the conditions that are normally associated with a planetary biosphere. So it's really an evolving science, and so like these particular things, I'm sure as more information is done, as for instance like the James Webb Space Telescope survey gets fully looked through and analyzed, I'm sure there'll be new planets to be cataloged, and so this is an ever evolving data chart. The next one has to do with essentially technology and the ability for a life form to be communicating on the same wavelength. So let's assume for a second that you're smart, and let's say another person is on another continent, right? And he's smart too. What's the odds that they're both going to develop the exact same technology that can be able to send signals and communicate with each other? My thought process is that at some point the answer is yes, but how often that occurs is probably very, 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 very low. Because it's not just needing the technology, it's needing it and using it at a similar time frame. Because I mean, like, I don't know about you, but I communicate with a phone today, using a cellular signal. It wasn't that long ago that there were radio waves, or how we were, sending and communicating with people. So it's a different type of technology that's communicating in a different way. I think civilizations only use certain amounts of technology in a certain way for a specific period of time before it becomes obsolete and something else gets picked up. And I don't think there's a universal communication just yet that we've really discovered. And so to me, I think that the ability to communicate is going to be extremely difficult if there is in fact life. And I'm going to put this in the frame of I believe that there's intelligent life out there. But, and I have to say this, I don't know if it's living in such a vicinity that we can communicate with it. I'd like to believe it is, and there will be a story at the end that will make it seem that way. But I swear to you that I I would like to believe it, but I think it's probably not the case when it comes to intelligent life, at least in our neighborhood.
Story time?
Huh?
Oh, are we getting another story time later?
Oh yes, at the end there will be a story.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. All right, and then the last one has to do with length of time, which I kind of touched upon when it comes to technology. But here's the real thing, right? How do we really define a civilization? Is it since humanity, essentially, differentiated itself from animals in the continent of Africa? Like approximately between 100,000 and 2 million years ago, and then all the way up till today. Does that count as a civilization, or is it more like the time blocks that we have, where there's the Roman civilization, the Byzantine Empire, the Chinese dynasties? Are those civilizations? And if so, what is the actual longevity of those particular societies? I tend to think that the answer probably is that we have to look at the species as a whole and call that as its civilization for this particular value, because if you don't, then I don't think they're going to be around for that long, or at least at the same level. So anyways, do we have any comments in the chat?
Yeah, we do. We've got a couple that
All right.
I was trying to get your attention earlier.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go over them. What's on there?
All right, starting with the first one from the top when I made that offhand comment about the Stonehenge.
Okay.
We got aliens, Stonehenge, man. Sam Fisher.
Oh, okay. So they believe that aliens created Stonehenge. I mean, who knows? I mean,
Who knows? We've got one from Matthew too. It's like, nope, aliens. How you explain the technological advancement in the early centuries? It's gotta be damn aliens. I tell you what.
I mean, I don't know. I think that a lot of people don't give really smart people credit. I mean, really diligently smart people credit. I think that's the real reason why we have the wonderful technology today. But I mean, hey, aliens, perhaps, maybe like, the U.S. military scooped up some aliens out in the desert, not too long ago, and was like, hey, let me steal your tech. Let me make some nightlights out of some stuff first, and just gotta go from there.
When you were talking about whether life actually needs water because, we're basing things off of our own planet.
Yeah.
Sam Fisher, are you saying that life simply finds a way?
Yes, I am. I do think life finds a way. You start off with a bunch of female dinosaurs, and pretty soon you have yourself a bunch of other dinosaurs. Yes, eyebrows. Anyways, let's go back to it. All right.
You were talking about intelligence, essentially, I believe, when this comment came in. Correct me if I'm wrong, because you went over a bit of information.
Sure.
That's a pretty big assumption for both of us. Curse you, collected subconscious.
Okay.
Probably something like "Get Behind Me, Satan" from Matthew.
Oh, no.
Oh, Dassy, who says there's intelligent life here?
Well, I'm going to say this. Intelligent life is whatever you define it. I tend to believe that it takes a form of intelligence to be able to communicate in the wonderful ways that we have learned to communicate with. The fact that I'm talking with all you wonderful people today is kind of a sign of that particular intelligence. So to me, yes, I think we live in an intelligent society. And here's the thing, too. I'm going to point out. I say society, a group of people that are smart. I am not saying the individual person is in fact smart. That's not what I'm saying. And And so you can tie back that to Men in Black and their explanation for why.
I mean, some aspects of society are kind of dumb.
Yeah, yeah. I can definitely agree to that. Okay, anyway, so is that it for the comments, or we got any
No.
more?
We've got one about your question about what a civilization is.
Okay.
Cassie essentially asked, do they need a flag? Only to immediately get a response from Matthew saying, no need for a flag.
Okay.
Essentially, like, what do we consider civilization?
Sure. Okay.
And, oh, one about the technological advancement from Sam Fisher. There was a lost clock on a sunken Roman ship that was far more modern than it should have been for the time frame.
Not Roman, Greek.
Greek?
Mm-hmm.
You know what ship they're talking about?
Oh, I'm very much familiar with that particular thing. Here's the thing. So it was made out of brass, and it was fished out of the Mediterranean Sea. And what was considered to be advanced about it had to do with the number of small gears and mechanisms that were used to calculate. If I remember correctly, it was to calculate the longitude, but it might have been something else. I know it was a sea chart kind of device, and there are parts of it they don't quite understand. But here's the thing: I would challenge the particular idea of this. Something that you don't understand doesn't make it alien. I think that it's a big leap to make that particular thing. So I would say that let's take a look at what the actual function is before we jump to aliens in that particular regard. Not saying it's not aliens. I'm just saying it's probably not aliens.
We got another mention about from Dassy.
Okay.
Don't forget the mysterious dodecahedron.
Yeah, you've lost me on that one. I'm not certain of that. But hey, you know what? Let's take a pause for the comments for a sec or two. Let's continue on with some of the other sections, shall we?
Sure.
Okay, so the next thing I kind of want to point out is the fact that the question of life in the universe as a whole has been talked about by multiple philosophers and multiple individuals for pretty much, I mean, as long as humanity has existed. There's been, I think, two big questions. The first big question is, what happens when we die? And I think the second question is, are we alone in the universe? And I think that before, too many things had diluted the overall average consciousness, I think there was this notion that aliens must exist, or there must be extraterrestrial intelligences, because we exist. And I think that particular assumption is kind of important. And it's also important to note, too, this. While the Greek philosophers are given credit for being the first people to discuss this particular concept, before the Greek philosophers that were documenting these things, there were oral traditions that went on for literally untold numbers of years. And so who knows how old the concept is. But we have an article here that kind of explains a little bit of the background of the ideas around extraterrestrial intelligence historically. It starts off with the Greeks in it, and then it continues on to closer to the 90s or so. But we're going to focus primarily on one element of this. We're going to talk about basically from the Greek philosophers to roughly around the late 1800s. So, Rose, would you be kind enough to throw up the article and begin educating us?
This one, right?
Yes.
All right. It's a book from Stephen Wolfram, A New Kind of Science. Let's see. History of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Although Greek philosophers such as Democritus believed that there must be an infinite number of worlds, all with inhabitants like us, the prevailing view in antiquity, later supported by theological arguments, was that the Earth is special, and the only abode of life. However, with the development of Copernican ideas in the 1600s, it came to be widely, though not universally believed, even in theological circles, that other planets, as well as the moon, must have inhabitants like us. Many astronomers attributed features they saw on the moon to life, if not intelligence, but in the late 1800s, after it was found that the moon has no atmosphere, belief in life there began to wane. Starting in the 1870s, however, there began to be great interest in life on Mars, and it was thought, perhaps following the emphasis on terrestrial canal building at the time, that a vast network of canals on Mars had been observed. And although in 1911 the apparent building of new canals on Mars was still being soberly reported by newspapers, there was by the 1920s increasing skepticism.
All right, so I think the main thing that kind of stemmed from this is that I think before you had the Christian church perhaps influencing society, it was kind of commonly thought of that you had this large potential of life everywhere. And I also think that it's interesting that perhaps, when the church's influence started to wane, particularly during the, we'll call it this, the European social revolutions, because technically speaking, it happened way before the Renaissance. But we'll just say, 1400s, somewhere in that range in Europe, to even the modern day, in some ways, have had this transformative effect on the way in which we perceive the world, the way we perceive religion, and the way in which our societies congregate. And as such, I think it influences the way we think about things outside of us, including extraterrestrial life. And so I'd be curious, what are your thoughts upon reading this particular section? Like, what jumps out at you right away?
Let's see. I'd like to believe there are other inhabitants like us. It's like, there's how many planets in the solar system, much less the universe as well?
That's depends on who you talk to. I mean, is Pluto a planet or is it a dwarf planet?
Oh goodness, don't get started on that.
Is there a mysterious planet X out there? It's like, I don't know. I mean, let's call it 9, just because I grew up with Pluto being a planet.
Let's see. So, I'd like to believe that there's some life out there. I just don't know how far or how close it'd be.
Yeah, That's an
entertaining notion.
Yeah, I tend to believe that I think microbial life probably exists on some of the Jovian and perhaps some like the Galilean moons around the Jovian system, Jupiter, like Callisto, Enceladus, Europa, those kinds of moons. I think that's entirely possible that you could have microbial life living underneath some of the ice in like thermal vent style. But I don't think that it makes sense that alien life exists in any serious, large way in our system. I think that if we do, it's probably life forms that hitched a ride with us to the destination and found a way to ink out some sort of existence there.
We've got a question about I don't know if it's rhetorical or not. It's essentially with them believing that the Earth is special. Kyle states, didn't Aristotle and Plato all believe humans were special?
Well, I'm not an expert when it comes to Plato and Aristotle. I have read some of the things in which they have, it's reported that they discussed. And from that, I can say that, humanity is special, but perhaps humanity is not the rule.
We got one from Dasty Chat about this. Part of the shift is the onus on proof. Does something exist when it is proven or when it has not been disproven? Yeah, that sounds like a question now that I actually read it.
It is kind of a question. Yeah, throw it up there. We can try to tackle this a little bit. I think it could be entertaining. I think that the first thing you have to analyze is that which particular group is this about? I mean, if you're talking about it from a scientific perspective, then I think a scientific perspective requires primarily just not being able to be disproven, perhaps. But it also depends on the context of the question and what you're trying to define. I mean, an example is does God exist? And if that's the particular question you put forth, then science doesn't have an answer, so it's basically it's pointless to try and discuss it. But I also think that if it's something that you can test repeatedly over and over and over again and you can't find a way to disprove it, then I think then at that point, then you can say that there's some validity to whatever the thing is, in which case it should be supported until otherwise proven to not be. Kind of like the concept around gravity. Gravitation was an accepted concept for, ever since Newton, and it has, in the last 10, 20 years, starting to be challenged a little bit. At least the core ideas around it. Because, obviously gravitation, it's a somewhat fundamental force. But the real question is it an actual force, or is it a cause and effect due to the relation of matter? And so you can kind of like refute it, and so I think that's kind of what you see. I think that we should move on to the next thing, though.
Sure.
As much as I'd like to, delve in this a little bit, let's move on. So the next section, I believe, we'll be talking about UFOs and sightings.
That bit. Let me see if I got this.
Yeah, so we're gonna experiment with some stuff. Bear with us.
Okay. I got this. Hopefully.
The sound, though, remember?
Yeah, it's good.
No, I mean the other sound. That too, but obviously.
What to? That. La 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 da dun da dun da dun da dun dun. Oh goodness. Done. I'm hoping this actually works. I don't think so. Okay. La 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 la. Bum ba da dum bum bum ba. There we go. You got this. Thank you. Alright.
Alright, and so we got this wonderful image that I put to you guys. Is this image man or creature?
Oh, you're very young. You said image and I got confused. Ba-bum.
Man or creature? I wonder. What do you think?
If that's a person, I'm hoping. I don't know whether that's just normal for them or if they're like on something.
I mean, I don't know. He's got some crazy dance moves, whatever it is.
He's got some crazy dance moves. It's like, I wonder if you like put that to like music or whatnot.
Yeah, I wonder if he's like a moonwalk or something, Do we got any questions?
Sorry. As soon as somebody, Dassy Chat made a joke about it being grandpa. But they also say the creature being looks like a 12-year-old. Just 12-year-olds can be weird sometimes.
It could be that. It's totally possibly that.
Aliens live under the ocean from Matthew.
Yeah, potentially. Hey, who knows? Okay, so the next thing I kind of think would be kind of interesting is that in the 1950s, particularly 1952, there were a rash of UFO sightings that were done over the White House in particular, and we have a clip here of it that we'd like to show you guys to see what do you think. Do you think this is real, or is it a hoax of some kind? And if so, how was the hoax perpetrated in the 1950s?
Again, all of these clips and pictures are going to be put into the description once the live stream is over for you to view for yourself. Just beware, some of them can get loud.
Yes, very loud.
Alright, let's go ahead with this one. And play. No. Oh, that's creepy. I didn't.
So, the question I pose is this. Real or hoax? If it's a hoax, it'd be a damn good one for 1952. But what possible thing would make sense to explain that? I would pose to the chat.
I'm interested because it's like they just flight on by. It's like, is it planes or is it something else?
Oh no, that's the crazy thing. So like the story behind this, right? Just to delve into it just a little bit, right? Is
Sure.
that lights appeared over the Capitol building and the White House. This particular shot is over the Capitol building, not the White House. But it was all across the National Mall for like 2 weekends. They scrambled aircraft to go after it, and when the aircraft got close, the lights would disappear. And then when the aircraft would leave and land, they would reappear again. And it was done over the course of several weeks. So it's that was the thing. So the real question I wonder is that an example of UFOs and extraterrestrial life? And if so, why didn't we see aliens? Why didn't they just land on the lawn and be like, hello, take us to your leader kind of idea?
Let's see. We've got one from Musketeer. Odd and fascinating. Big question. Are these footage real or fake? Depends on the eye of the beholder and research.
Okay. All right.
Dassey proposes that technically it could be created with a reflection upon glass given the technology.
Okay, but hold on. You saw the image. Can you put the image back on there? Okay. So if you're going to use glass and reflecting, right? If the light, considering how big those lights are and how many of them there are, wouldn't it be possible to theoretically, like, see the mirrors and the light beams being casted? Kind of like, those lights that kind of move whenever they have, like, a big sale, like a car show. So I question, whether or not that's a plausible answer. I'm sorry, I don't mean to like go after that way, but like I've kind of, to me, it doesn't ring true.
They've got a funny comment about your question about why didn't aliens just land.
Okay, what's the?
They looked at us and changed their minds.
Yeah,
Fair.
They're like, oh god, they're hairy apes, sort of, but like they're not, and some of them are mean. Why? They go to war. Horrible. All right. Also, I mean, there's a series of different like shapes and whatnot of aircraft that have kind of been observed over time. Do you want to go ahead and run us through kind of a few of these images and get kind of like an idea of some of these things out there?
Yeah, sure. While I'm working on that, why did we decide? Why did we decide on aliens for this episode again?
Why did we decide on aliens?
Besides, just being a fun topic to talk about.
Well, I think the main reason why I wanted to discuss aliens has to do with towards the end of the program. But I'll kind of like clue everyone into this. So during the big peak of the coronavirus, the summer peak, I should say, the Air Force released a series of statements that essentially validated the existence of unidentified flying objects. And on top of that, also released footage of unidentified flying objects captured. Footage in which I plan to share with you guys. But that's the real reason why. It's because I think that like there's an idea, there's a key thought process inside the mind of every person that's innately curious about the unknown. And understanding that type of psychological connection between what is real and what is not, what is physical and what is mental, is an interesting thing to kind of delve into, and I think it would be a great point to stir a little bit of debate and potentially even a little bit of controversy. Because at the end of the day, I'd like to have a discussion about some things that are particularly maybe taboo or not as well discussed. Because I think the shroud of aliens as a whole is you got on the extreme side people who are diehard believers, and then on the other side you have diehard skeptics that basically think it's all a bunch of tricks. And I think that the truth lies somewhere in between, perhaps maybe a little closer to the skeptic side of things, but certainly it's not 100% black and white. And I think it's an important discussion we all have. Okay, so this is the first image, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay, yeah, so this is the image that I think a lot of people, when they think of a UFO, is the person they're going to like jump to. It's like a flying saucer, perhaps with a couple like kind of bumps on the top of it. with a little beam of light in the very bottom. What's the next image we got?
We got.
And then we got the lights, the balls in the sky kind of idea. Sometimes they fly in formation. Sometimes they're just a ball. World War II fighter pilots used to call these little balls, was it Spitfire or Firefly? I don't know. There's a bunch of different names that were used for them. Foo Fighters was, I think, the one that was primarily used. Yeah, I mean, these things used to mess with the pilots all the time, and sometimes would interfere with their communication equipment, and so they wouldn't be able to talk to the various people, and sometimes it would mess them up. They get to crash and whatnot. What's the next one?
I don't know. Before I show them, this one would look creepy coming at you. No, when it's like pitch black. Goodness.
Or even scarier. Okay, imagine you're on a passenger jet airliner, right? You're flying at 10,000 feet, and all of a sudden you look out the window and you see these 5 lights advancing to you. That'd be bad. That'd be a bad day.
All right.
It's like, what are the lights connected to, you know?
I think we might be covering this question later, so I'll save this question for later. But Kyle asked, my biggest question is this: why the secrecy about it all?
Okay, I'll get to that. Save the question. We'll get to that in a little bit. Okay.
Will do.
All right. So the next one we have is the cylinder-shaped objects. Right now, if you saw this, right, you're thinking that's a hot air balloon, right? Like that's a hot air balloon.
I'm pretty sure that's a blimp. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the only thing I question about it is it's like, where is the undercarriage part? You know, the part.
Yeah, I know it's just flat.
Yeah, it's
like,
just...
is the angle just proper enough to where we can't see the undercarriage?
Yeah, maybe.
Is it just like that bare pixel poking out?
Yeah. Or it could be, here's another thing too. What if it's just someone throwing a Xanax into the air and then taking a picture?
It's either that or a frisbee, right?
Maybe. No, I don't know about the frisbee part.
I don't know. It could get kind of flattish. I mean,
yeah, maybe it could be.
Tossed frisbees in weird ways.
That's true. Or it could be a shield. People who know that. All right. Yeah, so then there's also something else that's kind of interesting. A USO, an unidentified submerged object. I'm not sure. This is not the USO.
This is the one you listed for it.
Oh, okay, this is a guy getting abducted. It's like
This is the one you gave me for this one.
Okay, perhaps there was a snafu of sorts in the images. But, I mean, hey, this guy...
I mean, the stereotypical picture, you know?
Yeah, no, this is the guy who gets sucked up. This is the guy that you like... here's the thing. I seriously feel bad for the people whom claim to have an experience like this, then go to a hypnotherapist. The hypnotherapist then, awakens these memories in the person. And then causes all these PTSD symptoms. I personally think that it's the therapist's fault for some of this stuff. I think that they're planting images and ideas inside the minds of susceptible people. Personally, that's what I think. But there are a few outliers, like the Betty and something Farm Hill, or I don't know, I forgot the full name, but it was like a black and white couple in like the 50s or 60s that got abducted, right? And they said that they were experimented on. It was like the very first, or like one of the very first abduction like scenarios. That story, hearing that, is absolutely terrifying. I encourage you, if you guys ever want to like just scare yourselves, look up on YouTube that particular interview and hear what happened. Like, they literally, like, a grown-ass man screams, blood-curdling screams, like a girl screaming, when being told to recount how the surgical operation that was supposed to have happened to the guy. And there was also like some odd evidence too. So it's like, I don't know, like, it's like that's always like the captivating stories. There's always like odd little details that make it sound like, what if, I'm not 100% sold on the concept, but perhaps. I mean, maybe.
Sounds really disturbing.
Yeah. Disturbing is definitely something I I would use to describe it. Because, like, the thing is this, right? Regardless of whether or not they actually got abducted or not, right? They perceive that this horrible thing has happened to them. And there are probably deep psychological issues that are intertwined in the way in which that person is going to live the rest of their life. You know, I'm sure that they experience all sorts of horrible things that happen. I think the guy died of cancer or something like that in a very anomalous way. But yeah, it was one of those weird ones. But yeah, anyways, what's the next image we got? Is it the ball of light?
Let me check.
Yeah. This is the common. This is obviously not. This is like someone created this digitally, but this is what most likely is describing ball lightning, which is a real phenomena that exists and might explain some of the accounts of, like what I was saying about the Foo Fighters of World War II. But I also think that when it comes down to it, just because ball lightning is one example, it doesn't necessarily mean that you couldn't also have another form of UFO that would be similar to the properties of ball lightning, but be much larger. So that's kind of an interesting kind of idea. What are your thoughts about that?
About what in particular?
Like the ball lightning concept. Like, do you think that ball lightning, a natural phenomenon, explains why you see lights? Like, because like I think the lights have been described as some of them appearing over like fields, and that's where crop circles come from. And I think most people who have looked into crop circles know that 99% of crop circles are man-made. And so the idea was that the light that people see is from lanterns that people are holding, or some sort of light source they're holding while they're making the crop circles. But when the people who make the crop circles were, interrogated and looked at, none of them used light. So it kind of like worried, why is there a light then? So
the music just then with the upbeat captured my thoughts perfectly. As soon as you mentioned that they admitted they didn't use light, it just did that, and it just like, what?
Yeah.
I mean, it could explain some things. I'd need to do more research on the topic. I mean, even if this is an artistic rendition of it, it looks pretty. Sorry, I'm a lot about the aesthetics, so.
Yeah, I mean, hey.
And then I've researched a couple of those crop circles you were talking, and some of those are darn intricate. Like,
the people who are behind it. I mean, if they're people that are behind it, right? Damn talented. And if they're not, then what is the crop circle trying to convey? So, I mean, I think that there is the possibility out there that there are real crop circles that are produced by unexplained phenomena, and then there's a lot of copycats where you could have both things kind of going on. I think that's possible. I wouldn't 100% rule it out, but
I'm like kind of interested on for those like really large crop circles. Like, how do they manage the small details too? Because they can't just step back.
Yeah. Okay, well, what's the next one we got here? Is the oh yeah, this is the Phoenix Lights.
Yeah.
The Phoenix Lights is an interesting story. It was a ginormous flying V of lights that passed over Phoenix, Arizona, for a couple of nights. Actually, it wasn't just Thursday, like this one has depicted here. But this is an actual, I believe it's an image that was actually captured of it. And what a lot of people were saying about it was that it looked like there was like a shadowy figure, like ship, like a big giant boomerang, and the lights were kind of like socketed along. So it was an interesting thing, and there's like 20,000 people that saw this thing. And yet they were all told that it was not what they were. That it was nothing what they saw. That they saw some sort of, oddity or mass hallucination. But I question whether or not that's actually even possible, and especially because if it was a hallucination, why would there be video evidence of it? It's like hallucinations don't have physical, evidence. So. That's definitely one to kind of discuss. So, I'm curious, does the chat have any comments about any of the images we've been sharing so far?
Let me go ahead and pull this up. Ba. Goodness. About the lights that we were talking about, the
Sure.
like fire. Goodness gracious, great balls of fire.
Yeah.
Immediately followed by demons.
Of course. I mean, if it's not aliens, it's supernatural, right?
Supernatural, paranormal.
Oh my.
And then we've got one about the crop circles. Meanwhile, the aliens are just sitting there seeing who has to mow the earth this time.
You know, here's the better question. What if the aliens are taking some of the crops, right? And they're feeding the cows that they're running experiments on. That's a silly thing.
We
Don't
checked
follow.
them,
Don't
don't experiment on them.
follow.
We need to feed them and keep them alive so we don't have to return trip.
Or they just drop off all their cow shit, just like one spot. Why is there radiation here? I have no idea.
Bunch of cow dung.
All right, so well, let's go. Let's transition for a second into pop culture, particularly the idea surrounding the little green men. Okay.
Tiny little green man. Bam. I need to stop with my sound effects.
Oh my gosh, yes. Let's slow down the sound effects here a little bit, huh? Let's switch it back up.
Tiny little green man.
Okay, cool. So let's turn off the other sound effect and go back to the normal one, please.
Get creeped out?
No, I'm not getting creeped out. I'm just tired of hearing it. That's why. Okay, back
This
to
way.
normal. Yes, and then throw the aliens back up there.
Thank you.
Aliens in a box.
Boom.
All right, cool. So the normal concept of aliens, right, is the idea of these like little green men. And you may ask yourself, why? Why green or gray? And why are they little? And what's with the eyes? And what's with the mouth? And why is there like next to no nose? Or like it's just a slit? What's the concept behind this, right?
Mhm.
Well, some people would say that the idea of this stems back to Roswell and with the crash that happened. Now, some people say, right, that there were real alien bodies and that's kind of what they looked like. And the Air Force's explanation, which I tend to, in this particular instance, more likely believe, is that it was a testing site, and what they saw were crash test dummies that were in Air Force suits. I think the idea for the color green has to do with the fact that the clothing that they were wearing were green jumpsuits. And I think that we're making kind of an association. I think the pale skin from the dummies is the reason why there's gray and green, because it depends upon how far on the pendulum that you're willing to believe. I think that's where I believe, and that's the explanation that has been put forth before. The other side of it is that we have a deep desire to try and understand smaller stature people. That's the reason why we have an affinity for children, and we closely tie, the concept of children and the fear of losing children with other fears. And so we start to take a look at certain specific looks and we start to add to them. And so I think that something that you can really clearly see from the late 40s into the 60s, the whole range, you saw this evolution of alien life. All right, you had this idea that there were small statures, some were robots, some were like humanoid looking, and you had like this like whole like spectrum, right, of transition. And then eventually the grays, or the little green men, depending on which one you go with, became kind of the notion. And I think that the shape of them is kind of a combination of some of the aesthetics from these particular movies. And I also think it has to do with the fact, like particularly the eyes shape. The eyes have always been kind of the thing that always makes me kind of like weirded out when I think of aliens. And I think it's because of fear of that particular, like the dark shape and like the dark kind of like look. And I think that particular type of fear is common in a lot of people. I think a lot of people have that same fear. And it probably has to do with the fact that when you don't know something, you're going to be fearful. Because you don't know something and you're fearful, you immediately become prey to whatever that particular fear is. And so because of that, you have those particular competing emotional states, you're creating a kind of mild hysteria inside your own head. And you stop being cognizant of the most basic elements of your surroundings. And so immediately when you have this visualization, you're jumping to a series of fears that lead you into false conclusions. And I think that's kind of where the shape of aliens come from. And I think that that's another thing that could be used to describe that, at least from that particular perspective. That's my thinking on that, and I'm kind of like mashing together a couple of key concepts, poorly explaining it. I apologize, but honestly, it would take too long and be too boring to go over the specifics of certain behavior patterns in people that discuss this particular element. But if people care, I will be happy to do another episode that is entirely based upon this if people want. So send us an email, make a comment somewhere. We'll talk about it more if you care. If you don't, we'll move on. Okay, so the next thing.
Move on.
Okay.
Did you get a water break?
I sort of did, but I'll pick another one just because.
You mentioned the Roswell.
This video is not sponsored by Crystal Geyser.
Goodness.
It's delicious.
The Roswell incident earlier. Okay, now, for me, I didn't know anything about what the heck you were talking about until you started explaining it to me. So,
Okay.
do you want to give a brief summary of what the Roswell incident was? Or too late for that?
Do I want to? No, but will I? Sure. Okay, so the Roswell incident, late 40s, 1947. I want to say. Yes, I want to say that's the correct date.
May I look it up?
No, it's fine. It's fine. You asked for me to tell you what it is. I'm telling you what it is. You don't need to look up the thing. In essence, a rancher in Roswell, New Mexico, went out to a field and discovered a bunch of debris all over the place. This is where the story starts to kind of fall apart. Some people say that he went out there, found debris, found dead alien bodies, or a guy who was maybe perhaps half alive. And other people say he just found a bunch of debris and he called the local sheriff. Local sheriff comes out, looks at the debris, contacts the Air Force. Air Force comes out alongside the local sheriff, and they start basically picking up the debris, right? Debris is gathered, brought into a sheriff's station. A picture is taken alongside some Air Force individuals and some dude who's basically holding up what looks like some tin foil. Like, it looks really, really hokey and weird. And so the initial reason why we say that there's this stuff is that the first thing that appeared in the headlines was the Air Force put out saying, hey, we have a UFO that crashed, right? And then it was immediately detracted. And then there was like this controversy because later on, through Freedom of Information Act in the 90s, it was declassified to reveal that in fact the item that was claimed to have crashed was something called Project Mogul, which was this ginormous weather balloon that was basically trying to detect atomic blasts. They were spying on the Soviets long range, trying to pick up energy and certain things like that. And it was having a host of experimental equipment. And the claim was that there were dummies that were strapped onto this ginormous aircraft balloon situation. It's like whatever you want to call it. And the bodies that were claimed to be in the wreckage were dummies. That's the Cliff Notes version of the whole Roswell thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Hope that helped explain things.
Because again, I definitely had no idea what the heck the Roswell incident was until you told me like a couple days ago. So I don't know how many other people know it.
Yeah, I mean, like honestly, it's a pop culture phenomenon. I would be surprised if no one had ever heard of Roswell and hadn't heard at least some brief version of it.
I mean, I didn't until recently.
Yes, but you're sheltered. You are not the norm. You are the exception, not the
Fair.
rule. Okay, so what might... well, before I go too much into this, I think it's important to kind of throw up a little bit of humor. So there have been many sort of things that the U.S. Air Force has been claimed to have done. And over the years, they have said a lot of things that turned out to be misleading or somewhat of a lie. And so there's a lot of gags associated with it. So I thought, this would be an interesting time to show a image that kind of displays what the U.S. Air Force thinks of certain aircraft that they see in the night sky. So go ahead and throw it up there.
Oh, I need to adjust it so everybody can see it. There.
Yeah, so we have...
Professional, but I want everybody to see.
Yeah, so we have Rocket. It's a weather balloon. We have a U-2 spy satellite. It's also a weather balloon. We have Sputnik. That's a weather balloon. A flying saucer. That's definitely a weather balloon. The Enterprise, a weather balloon. A satellite. That's a weather balloon. The Bat Jet. Clearly, that's a weather balloon. I mean, like, all of these wonderful, things are all just weather balloons, except for the one, balloon, which is swamp gas.
I can't believe I found this. Ah.
Yes, and there's our lovely Rose who found this particular thing, and I thought was absolutely hysterical.
It was on. Do you want me to tell them the site I got it from?
Yeah, sure. Show the site.
Okay, I'm gonna need to... Where did I put that link?
Okay, and in the meantime, I'm gonna kind of discuss perhaps a little bit of things that I think are kind of messed up that the government has done. So essentially, the CIA, as well as the Air Force, as well as certain other we'll call them allies of the United States government, have used UFOs as cover stories and for various other, we'll say, missions, as a kind of that wasn't us that was flying over your airspace, it was UFOs. And they've propagated this notion, this idea, to try and explain away some of the things that they have done. But anyway, Tulsa, before I continue this, did you want to throw that up there now? So that way people can find it?
I found it on gosh darn Walmart.
Yeah, so you go to Walmart, you can get yourself a nice, awesome poster for $12.99.
We've got a comment from Musketeer. Yep, totally accurate chart. I know so. I'm military.
Everything's a weather balloon.
Except a weather balloon.
Yeah, damn you, weather balloon. All right. So when it comes down to it, right, the military have basically used all sorts of different things to try and explain what they were. In the 60s, there actually 56, I want to say, till 60 something. Maybe I'm off on the dates a little bit, perhaps. There was a project called Project Blue Book, and the idea behind the project was that the U.S. Air Force was inundated with people who were curious about UFOs. They wanted to know what the Air Force knew. And so they put together a team of people that would basically track down all of the UFO reports in the country. And then they would try to explain each one of these particular stories. Now, most of the time, the stories turned out to be just, common mundane stuff, or there were things that were explainable that were not extraordinary in any way. But there were, a dozen or so, potentially more, instances of actual UFOs that were, seen, caught, or there was some sort of unexplainable part of it. And instead of trying to solve these things, they literally just stonewalled the people who were being investigated when it came to that with no information whatsoever, outright lied, or, and this is the thing that I think is most fucked up, is that they would just make it disappear. We're talking the people wouldn't be able to talk about it. This is where the notion of the Men in Black come from, where there would be individuals who would come and they would appear at your house and they would basically, strong arm you into not really discussing the particular details of your story with anybody. And they would say stuff like, you know, if you do this, you're going to challenge the security of the country in one way or another. And so people, you know, that time were pretty respectful of the government and were like, okay, well, we don't want to, you know, mess with anybody. We don't want anything bad happening. Okay, we'll keep it quiet. And by, you know, deep sixing all these different stories, who knows, you know, the truth behind some of this stuff. There might actually be evidence that just got squashed that explains some of these things in a way that would be satisfactory to the majority of people today. But there is an individual that had a story that appeared in the 80s that is quite a fantastical tale. The guy's name is Bob Lazar. Bob Lazar, just for people who don't know, basically came out and said, hey, UFOs are real. I worked at a place called S4, which is part of the Area 51 complex, and I, you know, was working on reverse engineering. We have a clip. No, sorry, not a clip. We have a clip, and then we're going to show a Wikipedia file So I'm not sure how many of you guys have watched Joe Rogan. He's a pretty famous personality on YouTube and other places. He's a comedian, a fight commentator, and whatnot. And he interviewed Bob Lazar a couple years ago, and he was reflecting on his interview with another one of his guests a couple days later, and I think that it was kind of telling, and it kind of was interesting. And so it's kind of the thing that I think I'd like to share with you guys first, and from there we can kind of take a look at another Wikipedia page actually on Bob Lazar, and then kind of maybe discuss some of the key points with that. But without further ado, let's play it.
Okay. That you saw recently, the documentary.
Two of them. One of them is Area 51, Bob Lazar, and Area 51 and Flying Saucers. It's a documentary on this guy who claimed that he worked on these alien ships in Area 51 in the 1980s.
That gave me chills.
As time's gone on, more of the things that he said have proven to actually be true.
Like what?
Including an element that he talked about, element 115, I think it was called.
Like an organism from outer space?
No, an element, like a man-created element, you know, like there's carbon.
Right.
And, there's an element that they created that he talked about way before it was ever publicized. And he talked about this thing, and then it turned out to be true. He talked about these, there's these hand monitors that you would put your hand on this thing, and these lines, these metal lines would detect the distances in the bones of your fingers, the exact distances, and everyone is different. It's like a signature thing. Mm-hmm. And that they could find out if it was you or not you that was trying to go through. So the way they would scan people, the bioscan, would literally measure the bones in their fingers. And people said that was horseshit.
Wild.
He talked about this in the 1980s. People said it was horseshit, but then later on turned out, no, they did have that in Los Alamos, they did have that in Area 51, and that this technology was very, very
advanced.
Not just very advanced, but very not. It was not well known at all. Like very few people did. And this guy who was creator of this documentary, it was very difficult for them to get photos of this hand scanner. But this hand scanner did exist and existed exactly as this guy described it.
In the 80s, I mean, that's super progressive for that time.
There's also
even
people
for now
that did approve his top secret clearance to get to this place. They know that he actually worked there. There's people that worked in the same Los Alamos lab with him. They tried to say he never worked there, but his name's on the manifest. It's very strange. It's like they've tried to erase parts of this guy's past because he filmed a bunch of their crafts as they were flying around. Like he knew what days. This is the thing. That thing right there, you put your hand on that, and it actually measures the distance of the size and length of your bones.
That looks like something that's inside of an escape room in L.A.
It does. It's hilarious. It's so true. But
Doesn't it?
All right, so this particular clip is pretty interesting. I mean, I think that it kind of like is a whole bunch of things. I mean, I know that a lot of guys might not know who Bob Lazar is, but hopefully the Wikipedia article that we're going to be kind of like pulling up here, a little file. Should be able to kind of also explain a few of these other things that are kind of connected to that particular statement, and then we can kind of go back and reflect on it, if that's okay with you.
Sure. So you want me to pull up the wiki now?
Yes, please. All right. Well, I need to probably move it around just a little bit.
Working on it.
Okie dokie. We're still working on things.
Cool. Here we go.
All right. So go ahead and start with the claim.
Okay. Let's see. Lazar has achieved notoriety as an Area 51 conspiracy theorist. In May 1989, he appeared in an interview with investigative reporter George Knapp on Las Vegas TV station KLAS under the pseudonym Dennis, and with his face hidden, to discuss his purported employment at S4, a subsidiary facility he claimed exists near the Nellis Air Force Base installation known as Area 51. He claims that said facility was adjacent to Papoose Lake, which is located south of the main Area 51 facility at Groom Lake. He claimed the site consisted of concealed aircraft hangars built into a mountainside. Lazar said that his job was to help with the reverse engineering of one of 9 flying saucers, which he alleged were extraterrestrial in origin. He claims one of the flying saucers, the one he coined the sport model, was manufactured out of a metallic substance similar in appearance and touch to stainless steel. In a subsequent interview that November, Lazar appeared unmasked and under his own name, where he claimed that his job interview for work at the facility was contractor EG&G and his employer was the United States Navy. EG&G stated it had no records on him. Wait.
All right, stop there.
Wait. What?
We'll just pause there for a second.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, so honestly, when it comes down to that, like, what are your thoughts? I mean, like, that seems like a crazy story, right? Like, someone comes out and is like, hey, I reverse engineered UFOs. I worked on something called, I call it the sport model. It's made out of stainless steel. I used to work as a contractor. Like, what do you think about that? Just hearing
Sounds
that.
like a dream.
Sounds like a dream.
Kinda. Sounds like somebody had a very, very detailed dream, you know?
Yeah. Just to kind of like give like kind of the brief. We're just gonna kind of like speed through this a little bit. If you guys care to look through it, why don't you flick through it a little bit slowly so that way our audience can kind of read it through it. But I'm gonna give kind of like the fast version of this. So he essentially believed that, he believes, his claim is obviously that he reverse engineered aircraft and that it worked utilizing this element 115 that had the ability to reverse the magnetic effects of gravitation or something to that effect. Like it either manipulated gravity in such a way that it created anti-gravity effects. And he supposedly stole some of this element. He also led several people to go see these test flights where people would try and move them around. And he got caught, and he was afraid, and so he went to George Knapp and was like, hey, he told his story because he figured that if he told his story, then they couldn't kill him because he'd be in the eye of the media, and so it would substantiate his particular claim if they killed him. And it's true that his record seems to have been wiped out, and his home is frequently raided by FBI and other agencies, reportedly trying to stop or prevent certain, elements, we'll say, or radioactive substances from crossing state lines and things like that. He actually was convicted of a crime related to something to that effect. So there's some interesting stuff that has to do with Bob Lazar. Bob Lazar is a pretty fantastical figure. But the thing that's the reason why it's important to speak about this is because his claim is so bizarre and so out there and so like captured the public eye that it forces, in my particular mind, only two possible conclusions. The first conclusion is is it real? You know, could this guy really be telling the truth? And if so, what are the implications of that? I mean, somebody had like for about 30, 40 years, you know, at that time had access to alien tech, or you know, what exactly are they planning to do with something like that? And then the other thing is this: what if the guy is just, you know, one of these hired, you know, figures for the CIA that essentially was like, hey, tell this story, we're going to promote this idea, and you're going to get paid hush hush. You know, I mean, could he be a, you know, a Ponzi of some kind to the CIA to try and like manipulate the public when it comes to extraterrestrial life, to try and hide some secret program that almost got caught or something? I think it's possible. I think both are equally possible. But what do you think?
I mean, some parts have got to be true. You said that, like, his entire existence was attempted to be wiped or something.
Yeah. There's extensive, obviously, like people have done a bunch of stories and documentaries about Bob Lazar. But the things that you can definitely look up and find out to be true is that yes, somebody in the government attempted and succeeded in removing his social security card from like all records. Like it's gone. His educational background is completely gone. He worked at Los Alamos Labs. That evidence that they claim he never worked there, but yet there's a manifest that shows that yes, he did work there. There's a phone book that has his name in there. He can walk. He has been proven to walk around the place, not only know where things are, but know people who work there, and people who work there claim that he worked there too. So if you didn't have a certain educational background, you couldn't possibly work there. So there are things that do back up his particular claims at certain elements, which is why I lean on the if it's not real, then I think some element of the military or government is using him as a cover story for something. If that's not real, then maybe his actual story is real. I feel like it could only really be one of the two. I'd be interested to know in the chat if anyone thinks similarly or has even heard of Bob Lazar.
Gosh. It's either it's true and it's an amazing story, or it's fake and he's an amazing actor.
Yeah, I mean, and the guy, to his credit, I mean, it doesn't seem like he's tried to make any money off of his situation. He's tried to live mostly, you know, out of the way. I mean, the guy's got a crazy, like, backstory to it, too. So it's like, holy crap. You know?
At the moment, we haven't really made too many comments besides some jokes here and there.
Okay. All right. Well, let's play the next thing that I think is kind of interesting. I mentioned before, the Air Force thing, the confession thing. So the Air Force during the coronavirus actually did suggest, they said that UFOs were real and they actually had some evidence. I'd like to show you guys some of the evidence that's been presented. The first evidence that I want to kind of put up is known as the gimbal video, and it's a pretty short clip of where essentially a guy is tracking this unidentified object, and in the distance the operator can see a whole bunch of them. And I think it's just kind of an interesting clip to play, considering that this particular individual who's recording and talking about this is supposed to be working for the military, and at this time UFOs weren't supposed to be real. So what the hell is this about? So
did we want the sound on this thing?
Yes, we want the sound on the video.
Okay, let me just make sure it doesn't blast out my own eardrums too.
Yeah.
We're gonna try here.
Okay.
We'll see.
They're fucking drone, bro.
Oh god.
There's a whole
Nope.
fleet of them. Look on my ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not. That is an LNS, dude. Well, if there's like... Look at that thing! It's rotating.
Yeah, that last comment is definitely mine. It just rotated in the middle of the air.
In the language
what
of
did you
the
do?
US Department
I do
of
think.
Defense, these are
That's definitely not me.
aerial
No,
phenomena.
let me.
Videos
Stop.
which add fuel
Okay.
to the belief
Stop.
of some we are not alone. The first incident was filmed off the California coast in 2004.
Yep. Sorry about that.
Stop and let go of the computer.
Wow. Okay. Control issues. When it comes to the thing, then there's another clip which I think is kind of interesting, and it has to do with the Commander Fravor, who's a guy who is responsible for some of the footage regarding what's called the Tic Tac UFO incident. And once again, this is going to be pulled from the Joe Rogan podcast. I find it to be a fairly interesting program, and I think the interview that he did here was actually quite good. So I think this is going to kind of address a question that was potentially posed by someone in the chat that wanted to look at underwater UFOs. And it's kind of like an explanation a little bit of one. So,
Trying not to blast my ears off.
Okay.
2004
Talk to the pilots.
Comcast Video of the Year was the Mexican Air Force tracking like 6. So literally right after our incident, we come back, and I think we were getting ready to go to Fallon, and I had Comcast, and the home page comes up, and there's this video, and I go, holy cow, that looks like what we chased. And it was like 6 of these things, and they were tracking them in the same area too, right off the coast of Ensenada.
And it's not as rare. There's now admitted an increased frequency. A Pentagon spokeswoman finally went off script. I was tracking the scripts for the last 2 years of what Pentagon spokespeople say about Commander Fravor's experience. Someone went off script last week in the New York Times, and she admitted there's an increased frequency of near misses because of these AAVs, anomalous aerospace vehicles. So it's pretty astounding. We're getting all these kind of revelatory moments in these little seeds that these are not ours. We don't have this. Even Elon doesn't have this. I mean, this is a propulsion system unlike anything we have. It's amazing. It's gravity propelled.
Now, that gimbal footage,
Yeah.
when it said that there's a fleet of them, how far away are those guys where you don't see the individual objects, you only see a singular spot?
Well, the pod is, when you get pretty narrow, it'd be like, if I put 3 people around you, I can look at you and not see the other people. So that's what the pod is doing. But the radar is seeing everything because it has an AESA radar in it, which is an active electronically scanned array. So instead of like the radars we had, which did the mechanical, doing this, like old school, this thing is just a panel that sits in the front of the airplane, and through beam sharing or beam shaping, it can move and it can look all over. So we used to have what was called track while scan, so we would be able to track a target while we're still scanning. This thing has it scans while it tracks. So it literally, if the radar sees you, it has basically a weapons quality solution, and it can do that on multiple targets. It's the same way the spy radar, the Aegis system works on the cruisers.
I think this particular thing is kind of important because it kind of describes the previous video that we were kind of like looking at, which is the gimbal footage. And the reason why that's really important to understand is that it kind of explains kind of like like when the claim was, oh my God, like there's a whole bunch of them out there. Like that was kind of important. Oh, also, I'm not done with that video.
Yeah, no, I can put it up again later.
Okay, cool. And so that particular part of it is kind of really important because this is a guy who's been trained to use this equipment, and yet he's able to kind of explain that, but yet he kind of just casually goes, yeah, this is what this is and what they're hearing, which to me gives credibility to the particular view and also explains a little bit about what we're seeing. So go ahead and play the next bit of it. It's kind of important because it talks about the underwater UFO.
Sure.
It can track multiple targets and have weapons quality on all these different targets while it's still scanning a volume.
So in that image, you're seeing one individual object, but there's other objects?
Yes. The radar is seeing the object that the pod is looking at where they're talking. And when you hear the video, you hear the pilot say, dude, look at the SA page. There's a whole fleet of them. So what they're seeing is the pod is looking at the main. That's the bigger object at the gimbal, the thing that's rotating on the screen. And there's 5 smaller things in front. So this thing's just sitting there, and then he said they turn around on the radar and start going the other way while the pod's looking at this guy just kind of rotating.
So like a mothership and smaller aircraft.
Could be.
Something along those lines. Is there video of those smaller aircrafts or just the video
No.
of the one large one?
The only thing they have is the targeting pod. I would highly doubt, even if they had the video, that they're going to release the radar video because of classification levels.
Are you able to tell the story you told me about what was underwater with your other buddy? Because is that okay?
Yeah. So it's amazing. People come out of the woodwork when they figure out you've had this, because now they don't feel alone. So I was working. I still do it, but I was doing oil and gas at the time on a contract, and one of the guys, the story came out, and he was a Navy helicopter pilot. And he comes in, he goes, dude, hey, can I talk to you, man? I go, what about? He goes, dude, I got to talk to you. And I said, well, what do you want to talk to me about? He says, dude, you know your UFO? He said, yeah. He goes, I had a similar experience. I said, what's that? He said, he was flying CH-53s, which is a big heavy lift that the Marine Corps uses, and the Navy uses it for certain things. And when they go off of, for the East Coast, they do a lot of shooting off of, at the time, it was off of Puerto Rico. We had Roosevelt Roads that they ended up closing. But he was flying out of there. And, you got super clear Caribbean water. And they have these things, they're called BQMs. They fly around, and then when they're all done, because they'll fly towards the ships, and the ship can, they can track with the radar. And then they also do, the ships or submarines shoot torpedoes, they're called telemetry rounds. So they gather all the data on what the torpedo is doing underwater, and then they blow ballast, and this thing will come to the surface and float, and then they go pick them up, and then they can extract all the data out of them. So they do it for both. So he said the first time they're out and they're going to pick up this BQM. And those things, when they're flying, they're done, a parachute comes out, and they hook it up, the helo drops the swimmer in the water. He goes and hooks this whole thing up, and then they hoist the whole thing up and fly back, and then they extract the data. So he says he's sitting in the front. In helicopters, there's, CH-53, you can actually see down by your feet, just like typical, like you got a Hawaiian ride, because you can see when you're touching down. So you got really good visibility out of those things, and you can stick your head out the window, too, because you're just kind of hanging out. He says he's going on there, and they're getting this thing hooked up, and as he's looking down, because they're, 50 feet above the water, he sees kind of this dark mass coming up from the depths. And they start to hoist the diver up, and they've got the BQM, and as they hoist it up, he says, and he's looking at this thing going, what the hell is that? And then it just goes back down underwater. It just once they pull the kid and the BQM out of the water, this object descends back into the depths. So he thinks, well, that was pretty weird. So he goes out, he says, not too long later, a few months later, he's out and he's picking up a torpedo. So he says they hook the diver up on the winch, and they're lowering him in, and as he's looking down, he sees this big, massive, he goes, it's not a submarine. He's seen submarines before. Once you see a submarine, you can't confuse it with something else. This big object, kind of circular, he says, is coming up from the depths, and he starts screaming through the intercom system to tell him to pull the diver up, and the diver's like a few feet from the water. So they reverse the winch, and the diver's thinking, what the hell's going on? And he's getting pulled up, and all of a sudden, he said the torpedo just got sucked down underwater, and the object just descended back down into the depths, and they never recovered the torpedo.
Jesus.
And this happened in the late 90s. Mid to late 90s, I think it is.
Yeah, so when it comes to this particular thing, I'm done with the video. So when it comes to this particular sighting, why that's so important is that you have military trained professionals that are experiencing what could only be described as fantastical, experiences. And it makes you question, okay, well, if the military has had these kind of experiences, what else are they having? And, how much do they really know? And so it kind of leads into this whole notion of perhaps why. Why would they keep it, under wraps? And I believe earlier we had a question, right?
Yeah, we have one from Kyle about, let's see if I can pull this up here. Where'd it go? There. My biggest question is this: why the secrecy?
Okay, so why the secrecy kind of plays into what I'm going to be basically trying to say. All right, I don't know. I'm not military. I don't have anything, but I can say that there's probably the excuse that humanity, but the people who believe they control humanity, and let's be honest, they don't, but people who do believe that they do at least, they think that humanity's not ready to have the answers to these kind of big questions. that while cultures might be able to handle the information as a whole, the individual would break down. It would create huge potential problems. Those particular problems are, for lack of a better word, I think absurd. I think that the average person doesn't really need the daddy government to stop us or protect us from those kinds of thoughts and opinions, because at the end of the day, there are going to be people who believe and people who don't. And I don't think that the existence of aliens makes humans any less special, doesn't make us any less special. But I think that it's also incredibly important to kind of be able to understand that the thinking behind secrecy is almost always in the effort of trying to protect. And it is very rare, do anything other than that. And so I think that if you were at the end of the day have an issue or run into a particular problem, that if you're going to hide something, you're more likely going to hide it to protect. So enough of that for now. I want to end on a story. Story time, right? All right. Okay, so let's go ahead and click that back on.
Click what back on?
This. All right. Actually, I see there's a question. Should we let's look at the question first, or should we go to the story?
Let's see. Let's go ahead and read it. Oh, I got rid of the notepad. Grab that back. People believed in angels and gods for thousands of years. Why would anyone think aliens would cause problems?
Okay, so think about this, right? If you believed in angels and you believed in God, right? How does aliens fit into that narrative? If humans were made in God's image, then wouldn't that mean that aliens would also have to be? And if they're not, what are they? I think is the predominant argument that you might be able to present when it comes to that particular thing. And so that might explain to a small extent perhaps why that would create a problem, because aliens challenge at least the religious policies of their religion, of their organized religions at least. And I think that's the reason why I think in 2012 or 13 or something like that, I think the Pope actually said alien life probably exists, and it wouldn't affect religious faith. And I think it's because they had to make sure that that's not in I think they were preparing for some discovery, and they wanted to be ahead of the curve in response. But yeah, were there any more questions, or that's it?
That's it for questions for tonight.
Okay, all right. So tonight we end on a story. So not a lot of people know this, but I've actually seen something that I think could be classified as an unidentified flying object. Now, I'm not going to say it's an alien, because I don't know what it was. All right, it is truly a UFO, is what I saw. So, years ago, I used to go to Disneyland pretty frequently in Anaheim, California, and I would participate in local tournaments there. And before a tournament, I would always go to Disneyland. On one particular day, I was going to Disneyland, and in the evening time, we decided to go back to the hotel for some food, for some dinner. And when we were done eating, we headed back to the park. It was about 5:30 p.m. And something catches me out of the corner of my eye. And the reason why, I don't know. Maybe it's just because I just kind of look whenever I see something that's kind of odd, I just kind of instantly drawn to it. But what I saw was what looked to be a swirl in the sky. And to me, clouds don't make swirls. And so I was thinking, oh man, maybe there's like some sort of like special firework because it's Disneyland, you know? It's like, all right, maybe that's what it is. But it was really far up, and it started to do some weird stuff. It started to emit light as it was swirling around, right? And as it's doing this, I'm just thinking, man, that's a bizarre looking thing, man. That's like nothing I've ever seen before. And it starts getting brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter, and then suddenly it disperses the clouds around this like spiral of light. And the thing that was weird about it was that the spiral of light was starting to become tighter, like as if it was like becoming almost like a ball. And the thing about the area around the clouds that had moved around is that it was pitch black. So this is like blue sky, right? And it's like a pitch black area. But the weird part is that if you looked at it long enough, you started seeing what looked like starlight in the thing, in this black circular kind of disc with clouds that are around this disc. And so I'm like, this is bizarre. I start getting like the people I'm with's attention. So we're all looking up at it, and there's like a crowd of people, like a large number of people in parking lots and like in whatnot around Disneyland, all looking up, pointing at this thing. And so it makes this really weird kind of like shape to it. And the only thing that kind of explains it is that it looks like the object was pulled back and then flung forward like a slingshot, and it kind of created this like streak of light for a second, and then it just was gone. And I don't know anything in nature, I don't know anything artificial that I've ever seen that operates this way. And so it was truly fantastical to me. And it's my UFO story. So, with that, I'd like to thank you for your time, thank you for the viewership, and I hope that you found tonight interesting. Until the next topic on Saturday.
Yep.
See you then.
We bid you adieu.